Start with sport, the Australian Open. Graham, are you entirely comfortable with this being played? We know, that the other sporting teams have come out here, but this is a huge operation. There have been positives in quarantine and a lot of people getting here ahead of what could be Australians coming home. Has this been the right decision?
Look, I should declare up front I'm a massive tennis fan, and normally a big competition, the Brisbane Open, in my electorate. It was moved to Melbourne, so a lot of sacrifices and changes have been made, but if it's all done under medical supervision with medical advice throughout, I don't have a huge problem. I don't think we need to conflate the fact that the 40,000 Australians are stranded overseas. That's a different process. We had a Prime Minister promise they'd be home by Christmas. I must admit, I thought it was going to be last Christmas. I didn't realise it was going to be Christmas 2021. We don't need to conflate the two, but listen to the medical advice throughout.
What do you think of the risk so far? We had a few complaints as well from the tennis players, Julian. I don't think a lot of Melburnians are getting out the violins for this one.
No, I don't think so either, and I think the tennis players should probably just hurry up and harden up. I mean, they're not being asked to do anything other than what other Australians have been asked to do. But, I do think there is a bit of frustration out there, I have to say. I don't agree with Graham Perrett's point, because I think Australians are a little bit frustrated. If state governments can step up to do a lot of work to help overseas tennis players come to Australia and quarantine, well, why aren't they doing the work to help us bring more Australians home from overseas who want to reunite with their family and friends? The federal government's doing a lot, putting on a lot of new flights and all the rest of it, but we need the state governments to step up and help us with the hotel quarantine caps as well. We've seen New South Wales do it very well, but other states have to do it too.
Your government slashed the numbers. Julian, your government slashed the number of international caps.
That was a national cabinet decision, but what we want to do is, as soon as the health advice allows, is to get more Australians home. But to do that, we need particularly
Isn't Scott Morrison at the head of the national cabinet there, Julian?
But we need Labor premiers to put their heads together and actually do some work to create more hotel quarantine places. If they can create them for tennis players like Daniel Andrews does, surely he can create them for Australians who want to return from overseas as well.
OK, I'll go to Graham in a moment on that, but what about what's been called for a long time? More people to be quarantined in regional areas. You can have FIFO workers. You drastically reduce the risk of people in cities. Any cases are going to get out occasionally. It's just too hard. There's another more contagious strain. If this were happening regionally, we know how quickly the coalition got up regionally processing centres for asylum seekers. Why not the same urgency on Australians wanting to return home?
Well, but doesn't this go to the point that I was just saying, is that we've got a Labor Premier here in Queensland, Palaszczuk, who's just now floating it as a thought bubble. Why hasn't she been doing this work for months and months and months? Why isn't it already in place so that we can lift those caps, so that when the federal flights come home, we can get more Australians?
But what about the centres the federal government is in charge of?
The federal government is doing an awful lot. These facilities have to have ensuite bathrooms, not communal facilities. That's the thing. A lot of these federal facilities have communal facilities. But we're happy to work with any state and territory who wants to lift their cap, because that is our focus. We want to get more Australians home. We brought 70,000 Australians home since the Prime Minister said we'd make it a priority.
So, Graham, and just on this point
Julian,
you said let's not conflate the two issues, Graham, of these tennis players and Australians trying to return home. The tennis players are in hotels under hotel quarantine, being brought in to the state that way. Isn't it the same way a returning Australian would be returned home? Extra spots have been found for tennis players and their entourage.
Well, I think the Australian. My understanding is that the Australian Open, the tennis players' funding is different to the individual funding of that process is different.
Returning
to what
Australians
we're
are funding their own quarantine as well.
Well, I know this, that the Prime Minister promised that he'd have the 40,000 stranded Aussies home by Christmas. He's had Jane Holton's reports, 3-4 months, hasn't implemented the recommendations from that. Julian says we're doing all that we can, but that's not the reality. The state governments are the ones doing the heavy lifting. When in terms of areas of responsibility,
they're the ones that need to do the hotel quarantine, yes, and they're not doing it.
Julian, the federally controlled spaces that, as Tom pointed out, where you're quick to slot refugees in at the start of the process, you're quick to move people from China into some of those areas. The government needs to step up rather than take a holiday when it comes to stranded Aussies and getting more of them home.
I just want to move on. I'm going to jump in there. Let's talk about the vaccine concern, of course. Deaths of up to 30 people in Norway. Now, authorities very cautious here. They're saying this was administered to some people quite old with underlying health conditions as well. How much does the government need to assure people, and can it indeed, Julian, that the risk here is low and the TGA is going to tread very carefully?
Well, the TGA, the fact is the TGA is treading very carefully. Because we've managed the pandemic relatively well compared to other overseas countries, we've had the ability to take the time that we need for the TGA to properly assess the efficacy and safety of these vaccines. So let the TGA do the work. The only one who wasn't prepared to do that is Anthony Albanese, who's been calling for a faster rollout. The WhatsApp.
Well, hang on. Can you point to me where Anthony Albanese said, let's not go through the proper processes with the TGA? Did he ever say that?
Well, he's certainly been doing press conferences calling on the vaccine to be rolled out faster, and the reality is we have been taking a process which allows the TGA to take the time to assess the efficacy. So unless you want to truncate that process, how else does Anthony Albanese want to roll it out faster?
Well, you can have more vaccines, I suppose. You have more vaccines.
I don't know how Anthony Albanese is going to explain that to his caucus at a time when his leadership's in a bit of trouble. I'd hate to think how Graham Perrett's going to shore up his leadership and explain that to the caucus.
Graham Perrett, how does this happen faster?
Yeah. Julian's leader said clearly, loudly, lots of press releases that we're at the front of the queue in terms of world vaccines. They have not managed this right. They haven't managed the risk right.
Graham, are you saying that TGA shouldn't take the time to assess it? The TGA hasn't approved it yet.
No, of course not, Julian.
So how can you roll it out? How can you say the Prime Minister should have rolled it out already?
Julian, your press conference champion, the Prime Minister, said we're at the front of the queue. Look around the world at the millions of people that have been vaccinated. How many of them are Australian? The government has stuffed it up. Now, we need to look at what's happening in Norway, obviously, and look at all of the data, but you can't say that they've managed the risk appropriately.
When you say a lot of people have already been vaccinated, let me just jump in there, Julian.
Hasn't done the right thing.
Let me ask you this, Graham Perrett. You say that millions around the world have been vaccinated, Australians haven't. They've only been vaccinated under emergency provisions. Are you saying Australia should now be vaccinating under an emergency provision rather than a full and final approval by the TGA?
No, I'm saying that we were told by the Prime Minister very early that we're at the front of the queue. Well, they're just your Prime Minister's words, Julian. He said we're at the front of the queue in terms of vaccinations. They've gone with 3 rather than spreading the risk. I understand that getting the vaccines right is a difficult process and the logistics of rolling it out, but I do not have a lot of confidence in the people that brought us sports rorts, the people that brought us robo-debt, all of those things. This is the same government.
But do you have confidence in the TGA, Graham?
Health decisions.
I just want to drill down on this point, because you're saying that millions of people around the world have had the vaccine, Australians haven't. Aren't we still guided by, and perhaps there could be more vaccines down the track, perhaps there'll be a dose issue with Pfizer, but right now, if Australians were getting vaccinated, it would be under emergency provisions. It would be before the final and full approval by the TGA.
And as Anthony Albanese has made very clear, we should follow the medical advice. And obviously our medical advice goes through the prism of the TGA. I'm sure Greg Hunt has done everything that he possibly could to make sure that that process is expedited. I haven't heard him sort of go through those details, but I take you back to the comments made by Scott Morrison last year that when it came to vaccines, we were ahead of the rest of the world, ahead of the queue. That does not bear out what we're seeing in Australia in January of 2021.
All right. I just wanted to touch on a final point to do with this, and some interesting comments, Julian, from Gladys Berejiklian, looking at not allowing some people, or indeed any people that refuse vaccines, perhaps into venues. It could include pubs, perhaps into workplaces. What do you think of this and any effect it will have, positive or negative, on people getting a vaccine?
Yeah, well, look, I want to preface my comments by reinforcing the fact that the government said that the vaccine is going to be voluntary. It's up to people whether they want to take it. We're going to be encouraging people to take the vaccine. I'm going to take it. It's the moment I'm offered it in a heartbeat. But I was thinking about this. I support what the Premier's saying here, because I'm thinking about these as small businesses in terms of pubs and clubs in particular, hospitality venues. We know what happens when they have a COVID flare-up. We've seen in the last couple of months they have to shut down, they get publicly named, they have to go through the cost of cleaning and new food and all the rest of it, and then encouraging people to come back. In terms of small businesses being able to protect their own livelihoods, I'm not adverse to them encouraging people to come to their premises who have had the vaccine, or in fact saying that only people who have had the vaccine can come.
All right. Nearly out of time. Just quickly, your thoughts, Graham. Are you comfortable with what's a bit of old-fashioned coercion, I guess?
Well, it's a contract arrangement, and I do agree with Julian on that. I am wary. We are a herd, so obviously the herd works best when as many people are protected as possible. We've seen with no jab, no pay, the benefits that come from vaccination for children and how that has changed behaviour. I am particularly wary of some of Julian's LNP colleagues who are peddling misinformation about COVID and vaccines. I would hope that Greg Hunt and Scott Morrison take a more sensible approach and convince as many people as possible. And like Julian, I'll be signing up for a jab as soon as possible.
We're out of time. We'll end on that gentle dig, if I could suggest that. Graham Perrett, Julian Simmonds, thanks for your time as ever.